I'm beginning a series today where I look at some of the inspiring men and women we find in the New Testament. As we briefly examine each of their lives, we're bound to question what their legacy is, or put another way, what impact did they have on the world and leave for us today? Without any doubt, amongst the 12 immediate followers of Jesus, Simon Peter is the person about whom we know the most. I've chosen to consider his life from a critical midpoint, where he denied knowing Jesus. He decided to follow, he had been part of that special group, and then he denied him. So I'm going to read from Luke chapter 22, verses 56 through to 62. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You are also one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. You know, I think that's one of the saddest passages in the whole of the New Testament. Of course, we remember how he was originally known as Simon and was given the name of Peter, which had its link to the word rock. But here that rock is crumbling and crumbling fast. We also know that this same Peter became the first great leader of the Christian community. His experience of denial helped to shape him. He contradicted Jesus at Caesarea Philippi. Jesus restored him on the beach. That wonderful passage at the end of John's Gospel where Jesus takes him away from the rest of the disciples and gives him a wonderful sense of calling to feed my sheep, says Jesus. He is the leader of the apostles at the early part of the Acts of the Apostles. There's that wonderful moment at Pentecost where Peter stands up and all the apostles stand up with him. What is it then about Peter that attracts people to him? Well, I reckon if I had to put it in a nutshell, I'd say this. It's his very limitations, his blunders, the signs of weakness that endear us to him. We really do feel we want to understand more about this man. He feels more like one of us. Perhaps we're drawn to him because he's very much like ourselves. The work of the Holy Spirit changed Peter into the man he became. He becomes one who is unafraid to declare the good news of Jesus. And so many must have been. Peter was prepared to do that. He was prepared to challenge the church, to think about the way that it did things after it grew out of this Jewish group into a Christian church. And of course, tradition leads us to understand that his own life was taken from him in Rome. There are all kinds of stories. There are those who say he was crucified upside down on the way into the great city of Rome. Now, whatever happened, it's quite clear that Peter gave his life and himself to Jesus Christ. What a life. It begins with that sense of call when his brother brings him actually to Jesus, and Jesus knows what it is to challenge him and to say, you are and you will be. You are known as this. You will become like a rock, rock-like in your faith, rock-like in your purpose, rock-like in your commitment. What a great man is Peter. And Peter will always speak to us, I think, of the man who knew what it was to go through the cauldron, and that's what it is, a cauldron of denial, a cauldron of experience as he feels the pain. And there's a picture that used to hang, you know, in many church rooms, and it's a picture of Jesus as he looks at Peter. It's summed up in those words. And the Peter recognizes in the verse 61, the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Gosh, is it the look that makes him break down? Is it the look that brings him to a point where he's full of tears? I suspect it is, because that look is a look of love. That look, if it's a look of compassion, that look speaks right to the very heart and core of who Peter is. It is no wonder he doesn't just know what it is to weep. We read in these words that he wept bitterly. Oh gosh, full of regret, full of concern for what he'd done. In his introduction to 1 Peter, the great Bible expositor F.B. Meyer points out the fact that it would have been unlikely to ever imagine that the impulsive, rough-handed, so fond of action Peter could write such tender words to a suffering and persecuted church. That's what he did. It's him who writes, perhaps, to a community that is now being persecuted. He can only write in that way because his heart had been touched, because his life had been changed, and because he had been through that experience, not only of denial, but of restoration. And when Jesus calls Peter to join him on the beach away from the rest, the question that he asks him is, do you love me? And do you love me? That has a feel also of that same look of Jesus to Peter. It's a challenging look. It's one that questions the very heart of his intention, his purpose. And that I think is the nature of what it is that actually changes Peter and makes him the kind of person that can lead the church out of its narrowness to understand it must be a church ready to reach the Gentiles. It must be a church ready to reach the world. You see, that is what God does. And that is the nature of God's transforming love in Jesus Christ. It changes Peter, it changes me, and it can certainly change you.